Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stacked the last box of canned goods on the shelf. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. At 32, he looked older than his years. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left their mark, not just the visible scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, but the invisible ones that made sleep a luxury he rarely enjoyed. His phone buzzed against his hip. Marcus glanced at the caller ID and frowned. Unknown number with an international prefix he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. Hello? Is this Marcus Chen, formerly Sergeant Chen of the 82nd Airborne Division? The voice was crisp, professional, with an accent he couldn't place. Marcus tensed. Official calls about his military service rarely brought good news. Who's asking? My name is Ambassador Kethril of the Draconian Empire. I am calling regarding an inheritance left to you by His Royal Majesty, King Zareth the Magnificent. Marcus nearly dropped the phone. Look, buddy, if this is some kind of scam, I assure you, Sergeant Chen, this is quite legitimate. King Zareth was most specific in his will. You are to inherit his personal companion, a dragon named Silverwing. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He sank onto a milk crate behind the counter, his mind reeling. I think you have the wrong guy. I've never been to space. I've never met any alien king. According to our records, you served alongside Lieutenant David Morrison during your 2nd tour in Afghanistan. Is this correct? Marcus's blood ran cold. Dave Morrison, his best friend, his brother in arms, the man who had died saving Marcus's life when their convoy hit an IED. Yeah, Dave was my friend, but he's been dead for 8 years. Lieutenant Morrison was recruited by our embassy 3 months before his death. He spoke of you often during his brief service with our diplomatic corps. King Zareth was quite taken with the stories Morrison told about human courage and loyalty. The ambassador's words felt surreal, like something out of a bad science fiction movie. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. Let's say I believe you, which I don't. Why would an alien king leave me a dragon? King Zareth believed that humans possessed unique qualities that even we Draconians admire. Your species' capacity for sacrifice, for fighting against impossible odds, for protecting those weaker than yourselves. Morrison's stories about you exemplified these traits. Marcus thought about Dave, about the way his friend had always talked about wanting to see the stars, to meet aliens, to be part of something bigger than the endless cycle of war and poverty that seemed to define their lives. If Dave had somehow made it to space before his death, it would have been a dream come true. What exactly are we talking about here? Marcus asked, surprising himself by not hanging up. Silverwing is a white dragon, what you might call an albino. Among our people, white dragons are considered cursed, bearers of bad luck. They are shunned, reviled, often killed at birth. King Zareth saved Silverwing as an egg and raised her in secret. She was his most treasured companion, though he could never acknowledge her publicly. Marcus felt a familiar stir of anger, the same rage that had driven him to enlist after watching bullies pick on smaller kids in his neighborhood. So, you treat your own kind like garbage because of the color of their scales? Regrettably, yes. It is an ancient superstition that even royal decree cannot easily overcome. This is why King Zareth chose a human to inherit Silverwing. He believed that humans would judge her by her character, not her appearance. The store's bell chimed as a customer entered. Marcus watched the woman browse the snack aisle while processing this impossible conversation. His life was already a mess. He lived in a studio apartment above the store, survived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, and his biggest aspiration was saving enough money to maybe take a community college class. What would inheriting a dragon even mean? I can barely afford to feed myself, let alone some massive alien creature. Silverwing is not massive, Sergeant. She is roughly the size of your Earth horses, and dragons are capable of providing for themselves through hunting when necessary. More importantly, she comes with certain benefits, such as dragons are telepathic. They can share knowledge, provide protection, and form bonds with their chosen companions that transcend normal understanding. King Zareth also left a substantial inheritance to ensure Silverwing's care. Money. The word hit Marcus harder than he wanted to admit. He thought about his overdue rent, his maxed-out credit cards, the constant stress of wondering if he'd have enough to eat this week. How substantial? The equivalent of 10 million Earth dollars, along with a small spacecraft and legal documentation granting you citizenship in the Galactic Council. Marcus's knees went weak. $10 million. Enough to never worry about money again, to maybe go back to school, to build the life he'd always dreamed of but never thought possible. There's a catch, isn't there? There's always a catch. The inheritance comes with conditions. You must accept Silverwing as she is, treat her as a partner rather than a pet, and protect her from those who would harm her. Many Draconians view her existence as an abomination. There will be those who seek to destroy her simply for being born different. Marcus closed his eyes and saw Dave's face. Remembered his friend's last words. Take care of the ones who can't take care of themselves, Marcus. That's what makes us human. When would I meet her? Tonight, if you're willing. I have a transport waiting 3 miles outside your city. Silverwing is eager to meet the human her beloved king chose for her. Marcus looked around the cramped store, at his minimum wage job, at the life that felt more like a prison than an existence. Maybe Dave was still looking out for him somehow. Maybe this was his chance to finally matter, to be part of something important. All right, he said, surprising himself again. I'll come. But I want answers. Real answers about what I'm getting into. Of course, Sergeant. Bring whatever belongings you wish to keep. Your old life ends tonight. 3 hours later, Marcus stood in a field outside town, a duffel bag containing everything he owned slung over his shoulder. The night sky seemed brighter somehow, filled with stars that no longer looked distant and cold. A soft humming filled the air, growing louder until a sleek silver craft materialized out of nowhere, landing silently in the grass before him. The ship's door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a tall, elegant figure in flowing robes. Ambassador Kethril looked almost human, except for the subtle scales that covered his skin and the vertical pupils that gleamed like emeralds in the darkness. Sergeant Chen, Kethril said with a formal bow, welcome to your new life. As Marcus climbed aboard the ship, he thought about Dave, about second chances, and about the strange twist of fate that was about to change everything. Behind him, the lights of his old life grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the vast darkness of space. The ship's interior was elegant but functional, filled with soft blue light and the gentle hum of advanced technology. Kethril led him through several corridors to a large viewing chamber, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of Earth shrinking below them. She's beautiful, Marcus whispered, seeing his home planet from space for the first time. Indeed, Kethril agreed. King Zareth often said that humans were lucky to come from such a vibrant world. He believed it explained your species' fierce protective instincts. They traveled for what felt like hours but could have been minutes. Marcus had lost all sense of time and direction in the strange environment of the ship. Finally, Kethril led him to another chamber, smaller and more intimate, where a figure waited in the shadows. Silverwing, Kethril called softly. Your new companion has arrived. The dragon that emerged from the shadows took Marcus's breath away. She was beautiful in a way that defied description, her scales pure white like fresh snow, shimmering with an inner light that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, intelligent and cautious as they studied Marcus. She was smaller than he'd expected, perhaps 7 feet long from nose to tail tip, with wings that folded gracefully along her sides. There was something delicate about her, almost fragile, that made Marcus want to protect her even before they'd been properly introduced. "Hello," he said simply, not knowing what else to say. Silverwing tilted her head, studying him with those remarkable eyes. Then, without warning, her voice filled his mind, clear as spoken words, but infinitely more intimate. "You are not what I expected, Marcus Chen." Marcus stumbled backward, his hand flying to his head. "Did you just—" "Yes. I spoke to your mind. Is this your first telepathic contact?" Yeah, definitely." Marcus steadied himself against the wall, his heart pounding. "This is all pretty new to me." "You are afraid." It wasn't a question. Marcus considered lying, then decided on honesty. "Terrified, but not of you, of screwing this up, of not being what you need." Silverwing moved closer, her movements graceful and precise. She was close enough now that Marcus could see the intricate patterns in her scales, like frost on a window pane. "King Zareth told me that humans judge others by their actions, not their appearance. Is this true?" "For the good ones, yeah." Marcus found himself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. "What you look like doesn't matter to me. Who you are does. Then we may indeed be compatible." There was something like relief in her mental voice. "I have been alone for a very long time, Marcus Chen. Alone and unwanted." Marcus felt a familiar anger rise in his chest, the same rage he'd felt when Ambassador Kethril had described how white dragons were treated. "Well, you're not alone anymore, and for what it's worth, I think you're beautiful." Silverwing's scales shimmered brighter for a moment, and Marcus could have sworn she was pleased. "Beautiful," she repeated thoughtfully. "No one has ever called me that before." "Then they're all idiots," Marcus said firmly. "Every last one of them. You speak as Dave Morrison did. He also had little patience for fools and bigots." Marcus's heart clenched. "You knew Dave?" "He visited often during his time with our embassy. He spoke of you frequently, of your courage and loyalty. He believed you would understand what it meant to be different, to be cast aside because others fear what they do not understand." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding flooding through him. Dave had known about his struggles after coming home, about the nightmares and the isolation, about feeling like an outsider in his own country. His friend had somehow found a way to help him even after death. "King Zareth made me a promise before he died," Silverwing continued. "He said he would find me a companion who would value me for myself, not despite my appearance, someone who understood what it meant to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves." Marcus reached out slowly, letting Silverwing decide whether to accept his touch. When her scales met his palm, they were warm and smooth, vibrating slightly with her contentment. "I guess we both got lucky then," he said softly, "because I could use a friend who understands what it's like to be different." "Then it is decided. You are my companion, and I am yours. Together, we will face whatever comes." Ambassador Kethril cleared his throat gently. "If you are both satisfied with the arrangement, we should discuss the practical matters of your new situation." Marcus looked at Silverwing, then at the ambassador. His old life felt like a distant memory, something that had happened to someone else. Whatever came next, he was ready for it. "Yeah," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "Let's talk." 6 months had passed since Marcus first met Silverwing, and his life had transformed beyond recognition. The sprawling space station orbiting the planet Draconia Prime served as their temporary home, while Marcus learned about galactic civilization and Silverwing adjusted to having a companion who didn't flinch at her appearance. Their living quarters were luxurious by Marcus's old standards, but modest by galactic ones. The main room featured floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Draconia Prime below, its purple oceans and silver continents a constant reminder that Marcus was truly among the stars now. Silverwing lay stretched across a specially designed platform that accommodated her size, while allowing her to maintain the dignified posture that seemed natural to her species. She was reading, if it could be called that, her clawed finger tracing symbols on a holographic display, while information flowed directly into her mind. Marcus sat nearby, struggling with his own studies. Learning galactic trade languages was proving more difficult than expected, even with the neural enhancement technology Ambassador Kethril had provided. The device looked like a simple earpiece, but interfaced directly with his brain, accelerating learning beyond anything humans had ever achieved. "You're frustrated again," Silverwing observed without looking up from her studies. "I've been working on this diplomatic protocol for 3 hours, Marcus muttered, rubbing his temples. "Why do the Crystalline Federation require 17 different greeting rituals depending on the phase of their home star?" "Because they are an old species with many traditions. You humans are young and adaptable. They are ancient and set in their ways." Marcus leaned back in his chair and studied his companion. Over the past months, their bond had deepened beyond what he thought possible. Silverwing wasn't just telepathically linked to him. She had become his closest friend, his advisor, and in many ways, his guide to this vast new universe. "Tell me something," Marcus said, setting aside his studies. "What was King Zareth really like?" Silverwing's scales shifted slightly. A sign Marcus had learned indicated she was choosing her words carefully. "He was kind in private, though he had to appear stern in public. The crown weighed heavily on him, especially the burden of keeping me secret." "Why did he keep you secret? I mean, you're amazing. If people could just meet you—" "You do not understand draconian politics," Silverwing replied with something like amusement. "For 3,000 years, white dragons have been seen as harbingers of disaster. Every military defeat, every economic crisis, every natural catastrophe has been blamed on us. Zareth's advisors would have demanded my death if they knew I existed." Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger that always accompanied discussions of draconian prejudice. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're one of the smartest, most capable beings I've ever met." "Thank you. But intelligence and capability matter little when superstition runs so deep. This is why Zareth chose a human. Your species sees value where others see only difference." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the communication system. Ambassador Kethril's image appeared on the main display, his expression more serious than usual. "Marcus, Silverwing, I apologize for the intrusion, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." "What kind of situation?" Marcus asked, already reaching for the tactical vest he'd taken to wearing since learning that not all galactic citizens were friendly. 3 draconian military vessels have just entered the system. They claim to be investigating reports of a white dragon in violation of Imperial Edict 247. Silverwing's scales went dark, a reaction Marcus had never seen before. "They found us." "Can they legally do anything?" Marcus demanded. "We're in neutral space, and Silverwing is under diplomatic protection." Kethril's expression grew grimmer. "Technically, yes. They are within their rights to investigate. Imperial Edict 247 grants Draconian forces authority to eliminate white dragons anywhere in galactic space, regardless of territorial boundaries." Marcus stood up slowly, his mind racing. And if they find her, they will attempt to kill her. It is considered a sacred duty. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He looked at Silverwing, who had risen to her full height, her wings slightly spread in a defensive posture he'd never seen before. "I will not hide anymore," she said, her mental voice firm with resolve. "I am tired of living as if I am ashamed of what I am." "The hell you won't hide," Marcus snapped. "I'm not letting anyone hurt you." "Marcus, you cannot fight an entire military fleet." "Watch me." Kethril raised a hand for attention. "Before anyone does anything rash, you should know that you have options. The Galactic Council has been watching your partnership with great interest. Your success as human dragon team has not gone unnoticed." "What kind of options?" Marcus asked, though he was already forming plans for defending Silverwing if necessary. "The Council has been looking for ways to challenge the Draconian Empire's more archaic policies. Your case could serve as a precedent for reform, but only if you're willing to make a public stand." Marcus looked at Silverwing, reading the determination in her crystalline eyes. "What exactly would that involve?" "A formal hearing before the Galactic Council. You would present your case for why Imperial Edict 247 violates basic sentient rights. If you win, it could change everything for white dragons across the galaxy." "And if we lose?" Silverwing asked. "The Draconian military will have legal authority to carry out the edict." Marcus paced to the window, looking out at the stars that had become his new home. 6 months ago, his biggest concern was whether he'd have enough money for rent. Now he was being asked to challenge an empire that had existed for millennia. "How long do we have to decide?" "The Draconian ships will arrive at our station in approximately 6 hours. You need to decide quickly." Marcus turned back to Silverwing. "What do you want to do?" "I want to fight," she replied without hesitation. "Not with claws and fire, but with truth and courage. I am tired of hiding, tired of being ashamed of something I cannot control." Marcus nodded slowly. He thought about Dave Morrison, about the stories his friend had told him about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. This was bigger than anything he'd faced in Afghanistan, but the principle was the same. "We'll do it," he said firmly. "We'll take them on." Kethril smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "I was hoping you would say that. The Council has been preparing for this possibility. There's a ship waiting to take you to the Council chambers on Nexus Prime." "How long until the hearing?" 72 hours. That gives us time to prepare your case and ensure your safety during transit." Marcus began calculating what they would need. What about evidence, witnesses? How do we prove that Silverwing isn't some kind of cosmic threat? "Your bond with her is evidence enough," Kethril replied. "No white dragon has ever formed a telepathic partnership with another species. The fact that she chose to bond with you, and that the relationship has been so successful, challenges every assumption the Draconians have about white dragons." "There is something else," Silverwing interjected. "Something I have not told anyone, not even you, Marcus." Marcus turned to her, surprised. In 6 months of constant mental contact, he thought she had shared everything with him. "I can do things other dragons cannot. My abilities are different, enhanced. King Zareth suspected it, but never wanted to test me for fear of discovery." "What kind of abilities?" Kethril asked, leaning forward with interest. Silverwing moved to the center of the room. She closed her eyes and extended her consciousness outward. Marcus felt it happen through their bond, her awareness expanding beyond the confines of their quarters, beyond the station itself. "I can sense the thoughts and intentions of others across vast distances. I can feel the Draconian ships approaching, the anger and fear of their crews. But I can also sense something else. Hope." The holographic display in their quarters suddenly activated without any input from the room's systems. Images began flowing across the screen. Dragons throughout the galaxy, most of them the traditional colors of red, blue, green, and black. But scattered among them were others, scales of white and silver and pale gold, hiding in shadows and caves, living in secret fear. "There are more of us than anyone knows," Silverwing continued. "Dozens hidden across the galaxy, alone and afraid. If we succeed in this hearing, we could give them hope. We could give them freedom." Marcus stared at the images, understanding the true scope of what they were undertaking. This wasn't just about Silverwing anymore. It was about an entire subset of a species that had been condemned to live in terror for their entire lives. "Jesus," he whispered. "How many?" 43 that I can sense clearly, perhaps more that are too distant or too well hidden. Kethril was studying the displays with obvious amazement. "This changes everything. If the Council sees this evidence, if they understand that we're talking about dozens of sentient beings living in fear, they'll have to act," Marcus finished. "It becomes a galactic civil rights issue, not just a dispute about one dragon. But it also means the stakes are higher," Silverwing warned. "If we fail, the Draconian Empire will likely initiate a systematic hunt for all white dragons. My revelation could doom the very beings I hope to save." Marcus moved to stand beside her, placing his hand on her warm scales. "Then we don't fail. Simple as that." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus packed his few belongings, including his old army dress uniform. He wasn't sure why he brought it, but something told him he might need every reminder of who he was and where he came from. Ambassador Kethril briefed them on council procedures, galactic law, and the key figures they would face during the hearing. The Draconian Empire would send their finest legal minds and most persuasive speakers. The case would be decided by a panel of 12 representatives from different species across the galaxy. As their transport ship prepared for departure, Marcus stood at the viewing port watching the Draconian military vessels grow larger in the distance. They were sleek and deadly looking, built for war rather than diplomacy. "Are you afraid?" Silverwing asked, settling beside him. Marcus considered the question honestly. "Yeah, I'm afraid. But not of them. I'm afraid of letting you down, of not being smart enough or strong enough to win this thing. You have already given me more than I ever dared hope for. 6 months ago, I believed I would live and die alone. Now I have a companion who sees me as I am, not as my scales proclaim me to be. 6 months ago, I was stocking shelves in a convenience store, wondering if my life would ever amount to anything," Marcus replied. "Funny how things work out. Dave Morrison chose well when he spoke of you to King Zareth." Marcus smiled, feeling his friend's presence somehow. "Yeah, I think he did." The transport ship shuddered slightly as it engaged its faster-than-light drive. Through the viewing port, the stars elongated into streams of light as they jumped toward Nexus Prime and the most important trial in galactic history. "Whatever happens," Silverwing said, her mental voice warm with affection, "I am grateful to have known you, Marcus Chen." "Same here, girl. Same here." As the ship hurtled through hyperspace toward their destination, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A poor army veteran and a reviled alien dragon, about to challenge an empire and possibly change the fate of dozens of hidden beings across the galaxy. It sounded like something out of a science fiction movie, but it was real. And whatever happened next, Marcus knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime were more impressive than anything Marcus had ever imagined. The circular rooms stretched upward for hundreds of feet, with viewing galleries that could accommodate thousands of spectators from across the galaxy. 12 massive chairs surrounded the central floor, each designed for a different species that made up the council. Marcus stood at the defendant's podium, his old army dress uniform pressed and pristine. The metals on his chest felt heavier than usual, reminders of battles fought in dusty places that seemed impossibly small compared to this cosmic courtroom. Beside him, Silverwing sat with regal dignity, her white scales catching the chamber's crystalline lighting and turning it into something magical. The galleries were packed. Word of the hearing had spread throughout civilized space faster than anyone had anticipated. Representatives from dozens of species had come to witness what many were calling the most important civil rights case in galactic history. High Arbiter Zex Thul of the Nexaran Collective called the session to order. The ancient being's crystalline form pulsed with soft blue light as it spoke in the harmonic tones that served as the galactic standard language. This tribunal convenes to hear the matter of Imperial Edict 247 versus the rights of the being known as Silverwing. The Draconian Empire contests that this edict is necessary for the safety and stability of galactic civilization. The defendants claim that it violates basic sentient rights. Marcus glanced at the Draconian delegation across the chamber. High Prosecutor Veltar stood behind their podium, his dark red scales polished to a mirror shine, his eyes burning with the fanatic certainty that had made him famous throughout the Empire. Behind him sat 3 military advisors and a figure Marcus didn't recognize, an elderly Draconian whose presence seemed to make the others nervous. High Prosecutor Veltar, the High Arbiter continued, you may present the Empire's case. Veltar moved to the center of the chamber with the confident grace of a predator. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 3 millennia of tradition. Honored council members, we gather today not to persecute an individual, but to preserve the stability of galactic civilization itself. For over 3,000 years, Imperial Edict 247 has protected countless worlds from the disasters that white dragons inevitably bring. He activated a holographic display that showed images of destruction, burned cities, collapsed structures, scenes of devastation that made Marcus's stomach turn. Every appearance of a white dragon in recorded history has been followed by catastrophe. The collapse of the Vegan colonies, the destruction of mining station Omega-7. The loss of the exploration vessel, Star's Pride, with all hands. In each case, witnesses reported the presence of a white dragon shortly before disaster struck. Marcus felt Silverwing's tension through their bond. He speaks truth about the disasters, she admitted, but not about their cause. Veltar continued his presentation, building a case that painted white dragons as harbingers of doom, cosmic mistakes that threatened the natural order. His arguments were persuasive, backed by centuries of documented incidents and the unwavering belief of an entire empire. The defendant, Veltar gestured dismissively toward Silverwing, claims to be different, but evil often wears a pleasant mask. The human Marcus Chen may believe he has found a companion, but he has instead been deceived by a creature whose very existence defies natural law. Marcus's hands clenched into fists as Veltar spoke, but Silverwing's calming presence in his mind kept him from doing something stupid. They had prepared for this. They knew the arguments they would face. When Veltar finished his presentation, High Arbiter Zex Thul turned to Marcus. You may now present your defense. Marcus walked to the center of the chamber, acutely aware that billions of beings were watching. He thought about Dave Morrison, about all the times his friend had told him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Honored council members, Marcus began, his voice steadier than he felt. 6 months ago, I was a nobody, a broken-down veteran stocking shelves in a convenience store, wondering if my life would ever matter. Then I inherited Silverwing, and everything changed. He gestured to his companion, whose scales seemed to glow brighter under the chamber's lights. The prosecutor wants you to believe that she's some kind of cosmic disaster waiting to happen. But I've lived with her, fought alongside her, shared my mind with her. I know who she really is. Marcus activated his own holographic display, showing images from their 6 months together. Silverwing helping coordinate disaster relief on a mining colony, using her abilities to locate survivors trapped in collapsed tunnels, working with human engineers to design more efficient fusion reactors. Even simple moments of companionship and friendship. In 6 months, Silverwing has saved hundreds of lives, advanced scientific knowledge, and formed the first recorded telepathic bond between a dragon and a human. If she's a harbinger of disaster, she's doing a pretty lousy job of it. A murmur ran through the galleries. Marcus could see that his words were having an impact, but he knew the real evidence was yet to come. But the most important thing Silverwing has shown me isn't her abilities or her intelligence. It's her courage. The courage to reach out to a stranger from another world, to trust someone who had every reason to fear her, to hope for something better than a life spent hiding in shadows. Marcus looked directly at the council members, meeting their alien gazes with determination. That's not the action of a creature of evil. That's the action of someone who understands what it means to be different, to be judged by things beyond your control. He paused, gathering himself for the most important part of his argument. But don't take my word for it. Silverwing wants to show you something that will change how you see not just her, but dozens of others like her across the galaxy. Are you ready? Marcus asked through their bond. I am ready, Silverwing replied. It is time. Silverwing moved to the center of the chamber, her movements graceful despite her obvious nervousness. She looked up at the council members, then at the packed galleries, before closing her eyes and extending her consciousness outward. The chamber's holographic systems activated without any external input, displaying a galaxy-wide network of telepathic connections. Dozens of points of light appeared on the star map, each one representing a white dragon hidden somewhere in civilized space. My name is Silverwing. Her voice echoed telepathically through the chamber, reaching every mind present with crystal clarity. For 20 years I have lived in hiding, believing myself to be alone and cursed. Today I speak not just for myself, but for all of us. The points of light on the star map began to pulse, and suddenly the chamber was filled with voices, dozens of telepathic minds reaching out across impossible distances to join Silverwing's call. I am Moonscale, hidden in the asteroid fields of the Rigel system. I have spent 30 years alone, watching other ships pass by, afraid to make contact. I am Star Whisper, concealed in the ice caves of Pluto's moon. I dream of warmth and companionship, but I dare not seek it. I am Voidwing, trapped in the ruins of an abandoned space station. I have not spoken to another living being in 15 years. Voice after voice joined the chorus, each one a testament to decades of isolation and fear. The council members sat transfixed as the true scope of the White Dragon diaspora became clear. We are not harbingers of disaster, Silverwing continued, her mental voice strong and clear. We are refugees, scattered and hiding because of superstitions that have no basis in reality. High Prosecutor Veltar stood up, his face contorted with rage. Lies! Telepathic manipulation! The council cannot trust what this creature shows you. But the elderly Draconian who had been sitting silently behind Veltar suddenly rose. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I am Admiral Corinth, veteran of the Vegan Colonial War. I was there when the colonies fell. I saw the destruction firsthand. The chamber fell silent. Marcus had read about Admiral Corinth, a legendary figure in Draconian history whose testimony would carry enormous weight. For 50 years, I have believed that the white dragon we saw at Vega was responsible for the disaster that followed. But I was wrong. Veltar spun to face the Admiral, his eyes wide with shock. Admiral, you cannot— I can and I will, Corinth replied firmly. Last night I reviewed the classified files from the Vegan incident. Files that have been sealed for decades. The destruction wasn't caused by the White Dragon. It was caused by an experimental weapon malfunction in our own fleet. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Corinth continued, his voice heavy with regret. The White Dragon was trying to warn us. We didn't understand its telepathic calls for help until it was too late. Then we blamed it for our own mistakes, and that blame became legend. Marcus felt the shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The tide was turning, but he knew they needed to press their advantage. "Admiral," Marcus called out, "what about the other incidents? Mining Station Omega-7, the Star's Pride?" Corinth nodded grimly. "I spent all night reviewing those files as well. In every case, we found evidence that the White Dragons were trying to help, not harm. We just interpreted their actions through the lens of our own prejudice." High Prosecutor Veltar looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His entire case was crumbling before his eyes. "Now, Marcus," Silverwing urged, "while they are listening." Marcus moved back to the center of the chamber. "Honored council members, you've heard the truth about White Dragons. They're not monsters or harbingers of doom. They're refugees, driven into hiding by fear and superstition." He looked up at the galleries, at the thousands of beings watching this historic moment. "But this isn't just about dragons. It's about what kind of galaxy we want to live in. One where beings are judged by the color of their scales? Where an entire subset of a species is condemned to live in terror because of ancient superstitions? Or one where we judge people by their actions, by their character, by who they choose to be?" Marcus gestured to Silverwing, pride filling his voice. 6 months ago, I was nobody special, just another broken veteran trying to survive. But Silverwing saw something in me worth saving. She chose to trust a stranger, to bond with someone from a completely different species, to believe in the possibility of friendship despite everything she'd been taught about her own unworthiness. The chamber was completely silent now, every being present hanging on Marcus's words. "That's what humans do," Marcus continued. "We see potential where others see problems. We find hope in the darkest places. We stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves, because we know that's what makes us better than our worst impulses." He turned to face the council directly. "White dragons aren't cursed. They're gifted. Gifted with enhanced telepathic abilities that could revolutionize galactic communication. Gifted with unique perspectives that come from surviving discrimination. Gifted with the courage to keep hoping despite decades of rejection." Marcus paused, then delivered his closing argument with all the conviction he could muster. "The question isn't whether white dragons deserve to live free from persecution. The question is whether we, as civilized beings, deserve to call ourselves civilized if we allow this persecution to continue." High Arbiter Zexthul called for the council to deliberate. The 12 members huddled in their circle, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of sounds and lights as they debated the evidence they'd heard. Marcus returned to the defendant's podium, where Silverwing was waiting. "Whatever happens," she said, "you have given us dignity. For the first time in our lives, we have been heard." "We're going to win this," Marcus replied with quiet confidence. "I can feel it." After what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, the council reconvened. High Arbiter Zexthul's crystalline form pulsed brighter as it prepared to announce their decision. After careful deliberation, this council finds that Imperial Edict 247 violates the fundamental rights of sentient beings as established in the Galactic Charter. The edict is hereby declared null and void throughout civilized space. The chamber erupted in cheers. In the galleries, beings from dozens of species rose to their feet in applause. Through their telepathic bond, Marcus could feel the joy and relief of white dragons across the galaxy as news of their freedom spread. But Zexthul wasn't finished. "Furthermore, The Council orders the establishment of the White Dragon Integration Protocol, designed to help displaced white dragons find safe homes and companions throughout the galaxy. The human Marcus Chen and the dragon Silverwing will serve as ambassadors for this program, helping to facilitate bonds between humans and white dragons based on mutual respect and understanding. Marcus looked at Silverwing, seeing tears of joy sparkling in her crystalline eyes. "We did it," she whispered in his mind. "We actually did it." "No," Marcus replied, pulling her into an embrace that 6 months ago would have seemed impossible. "You did it. All of you. You found the courage to hope for something better." As they stood together in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the cheers of countless beings celebrating this historic victory, Marcus thought about Dave Morrison one last time. His friend had been right about humans seeing potential where others saw problems, but he'd been wrong about one thing. Marcus Chen wasn't nobody special anymore. He was the man who had stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, who had helped change the fate of an entire subset of a species, who had proven that friendship could transcend any barrier. He was exactly who he was supposed to be. 6 months later, Marcus and Silverwing stood on the observation deck of their new ship, the Second Chance, watching as they approached another space station where refugees awaited. They had become part of something larger than themselves, part of a movement that was reshaping galactic civilization one bond at a time. "Ready for another adventure?" Silverwing asked, her mental voice warm with affection and anticipation. Marcus smiled, adjusting his ambassador's uniform and checking the diplomatic credentials that had opened doors across the galaxy. "With you, I'm ready for anything." Together, they headed for the docking bay, where more white dragons waited for their chance at the freedom and friendship that had once seemed impossible. The future stretched before them, vast and full of possibility, just like the stars themselves.